In today's video, I'm going to tell you guys about a Cuban spy story. In the early 1990s, thousands of Cubans began to flee Cuba for the United States. This was because of the politics during the regime of Fidel Castro. So literally hundreds and thousands of middle-class Cubans began to desperately pack themselves onto these small homemade boats that were usually made out of cheap materials such as wood and rusty metals in order to travel to the United States. The journey that they had to make from the Florida Straits to the United States was approximately 90 miles, and it was a total human rights disaster because a lot of people died trying to get to the US. In response, a group of Cubans who had previously made their journeys to the United States successfully, they formed themselves a coalition and called themselves the Hermanos al Rescate, which means the Brother of Rescue. They put together a makeshift air force of single-engine airplanes and then flew themselves over to the Florida Straits in search of the refugee boats. And every time the pilots spot a refugee boat, they would then radio the coordinates over to the Coast Guards and then help would arrive for the refugees. The Hermanos al Rescate were able to save thousands of lives and they became the heroes. So as time passed, the group became more and more ambitious. So they started flying over the Cuban airspace and then they would drop leaflets telling the Cubans to rise up against Fidel Castro. Obviously, this really pissed off the Cuban government. So on February the 24th in 1996, three Hermanos al Rescate's planes took off for the Florida Straits as usual. And as the three planes flew closer to the Cuban coastline, suddenly two Cuban Air Force fighter jets just suddenly appeared from behind, and then they shot down two of the airplanes, killing 4 people on board. After the attack, the US government became very furious about this issue. But here's the controversy. The day before the 2 civilian airplanes were shot down, Eugene Carroll, who was a retired US admiral, had held a meeting with the top Cuban officials in Cuba. And during the meeting, the Cuban officials asked Carroll what was going to happen if they shot down the Hermanos al Rescate's planes flying over the Cuba airspace. Carroll was immediately able to interpret that question as a warning from the Cuban government. So he passed on the message to the DIA, but nobody took it seriously. The fishy thing was that Carroll's meeting with the Cuban government happened just one day before the attack. I mean, you could argue that it was pure coincidence, but on the flip side of it, maybe it could have been a setup. Maybe the Cuban government wanted to set up a date to meet with the US diplomats one day before the planned attack so that the US couldn't blame that the warning was vague or a long time ago. It turned out that the Cubans had a source inside the Hermanos al Rescate, and on the day before the attack, Juan Pablo, who was one of the pilots, disappeared from the US and then reappeared in Havana, Cuba. Juan Pablo then told Fidel Castro's side the fact that Hermanos al Rescate had something planned on the 24th. Because Fidel Castro knew that something was going to happen on the 24th, he deliberately planned a meeting with the US officials on the 23rd. So the US counterintelligence started to wonder who the person was that set up the meeting date on the 23rd. And it was Ana Montes, a CIA specialized in Cuban affairs. Ana Montes was a double agent working for Cuba since her first day of joining the CIA. And every day after work, she would go home and then type everything up from her memory and then send them to her Cuban handlers. For 17 years, she worked as a double agent for Cuba, leaking classified information. Her boyfriend at that time was also a CIA specializing in Cuba. He didn't know anything about it. Her brother, who was an FBI, also didn't have any clue about it either. Her sister, who was also in the CIA working in Cuban counterintelligence, she didn't have any clue about it too. So how did Ana Montes go unnoticed for 17 years? Here's the theory called the truth default theory by Tim Levine. The argument is that you believe someone not because that you have no doubts about them, but you believe someone because you don't have enough doubts about them. That's the reason why you tend to default to what the other person is saying if you don't have enough doubts. Ana Montes had a spot-clean resume. She was a star amongst the CIA. Her father was a psychiatrist and she attended the University of Virginia and then went on to study a master's degree in foreign affairs from Johns Hopkins University. On the day that Cuba shot down the 2 civilian airplanes, Ana Montes left the CIA office early even though it would have made sense if she'd stayed behind. I mean, Cuba had just shot down 2 unarmed civilian airplanes, which killed everybody on the aircraft, and she was a CIA specializing in Cuban affairs. So the normal reaction would be to go back to the office and see if there's anything that she could help with. But no, Anna left the office early, and when the US counterintelligence called her in and asked her why she had left early on that particular day, she said that she was tired and hungry. Her whole explanation just didn't make sense at all. But that's the takeaway of the theory. You tend to default to believe that what the other person is saying is true if you don't have enough doubts. For example, if you're suspecting that your girlfriend is cheating on you and you ask her if she is having an affair and she says no, then you'd believe her, right, in the first place. Your default is that she's telling the truth, and whatever little inconsistency you spot in the explanation, you tend to explain them away or rationalize them away. But 3 months later, you happen to notice her unusual credit card bills and other mysterious phone calls. Then you'll start to accumulate more red flags until you call her out. And that was chapter 3 of Talking to Strangers by Malcom Gladwell. Stay healthy, stay happy, and I'll see you guys in the next video.